Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Today we discuss three critical aspects of the Sengol controversy. First, can we really believe the story of its origin? Second, given that a scepter is very much a royal symbol, is it fitting that it should be installed in a democratic parliament? And third, given the way in which it was installed, was that in keeping with India's constitutional commitment to secularism? Those are the three key critical issues that I shall raise today with one of India's most distinguished historians, the editor of the selected works of Jawaharlal Nehru, Madhavan Palat. Professor Palat, I want to focus on several aspects of what I'm calling the Sengol controversy. But first, let me start with a simple question. Newspaper reports and photographs seem to have established that a Sengol was presented to Nehru by the Adheenam of the Tamil Mutt. Simply talking about that small aspect of presentation, is it now established as fact that Nehru did receive a Sengol from the Tamil Mutt?
The photographs seem to indicate that. It seems to be correct. But more than the photograph, I would trust the fact that it was in the Allahabad Museum, registered as a gift given to Nehru, and although it was called a walking stick. So it was a gift that had reached Nehru and had been placed there. And when we put the two together, it seems to be correct.
Now,
I believe every photograph.
Now, at that point, it seems that concurrence over what happened seems to end and discord and differences emerge. Contemporary accounts differ over when and at what time and where the Sengol was presented to Nehru. The Hindustan Times says it was presented at his residence on the 15th morning. The Statesman says it was presented at his residence on the 14th night. Time magazine says it was quite early on the 14th evening. The Hindu says it was at 11 o'clock. And believe it or not, the Indian Express says it was at exactly 11:50 p.m., but not at Nehru's residence, but in the Constituent Assembly. What should we make of these differing details of time and location?
Well, it just means that none of them were there on the spot. Each one is repeating or making up a story, which he's either heard somewhere or finds convenient to put in and finds colorful enough. The Time magazine I liked most of all. It was so fictional. It read like a novel, in fact. All the details about how it was carried to Nehru's house and so on. Now, how can so many press reporters have so many different accounts of it and such different timings? Most of all, if it was occurring at the Constituent Assembly, there would have to be a record. It can't go without a record. So it all shows that there is no official record whatsoever.
Therefore, you personally think that if it had happened at the Constituent Assembly, there'd have to be a record. And since there is no record, that account published by the Indian Express, that it was handed over at 11:50 p.m. 14th night in the Assembly, is clearly wrong.
It is wrong unless it can be corroborated with some other evidence. I don't know how the Indian Express can give such precise timing to it. There is no evidence, and they have not produced any.
Now, the government account claims that the idea of presenting Nehru with a Sengol originated out of a conversation with Mountbatten. Apparently, Mountbatten asked Nehru if there was a traditional Indian symbol for the transfer of power. Nehru allegedly consulted Rajagopalachari, who suggested the Chola custom of the scepter. And this is how the Sengol, it's claimed, came to be given to Nehru. As a historian, do you believe this story?
There's so many strange aspects to it. Look, on the one hand, it is entirely possible that Mountbatten could have asked Nehru for such a thing. Given Mountbatten's kind of character, he would have loved to have suggested it to Nehru, and then Nehru passed it on to somebody else, and for him to claim later on, look, I suggested to Nehru, and that's how it was done. That's typical of Mountbatten. But the point is, Mountbatten hasn't made such a claim himself. Others are making it on his behalf. And in such an important event as the transfer of power, and such an important piece of symbolism, Mountbatten would have elaborated in great detail, but he hasn't. So it's very unlikely. And the whole thing sounds a bit comic. Mountbatten telling Nehru, Nehru telling Rajaji, Rajaji going in on an archaeological expedition or a treasure hunt or some such thing, and coming up with this. It sounds all rather strange and bizarre, in fact. No, I cannot accept this.
Now, Rajmohan Gandhi, Rajagopalachari's grandson, has said, and I'm quoting him, he's never heard of Rajaji's purported role in the Sengol story. He adds, and again I'm quoting him, it is new to many and not just to me. How much doubt is cast on this story if Rajaji's own grandson, who incidentally is an accomplished historian in his own right, and who has written a very highly acclaimed biography of Rajaji, if he doesn't know about the story, then how much doubt is cast on the story itself?
Well, between him being a grandson and a biographer, I would prefer the biographer's role. Grandsons don't know very much. They only claim they know. They usually hear it from their grandfather's contemporaries, or at best their parents. But as a biographer, he's done the research. And if he hasn't seen anything, or hasn't come across any evidence, then I would take that very seriously. And therefore, it is even more doubtful now. Rajmohan Gandhi's biography is authoritative.
Let me at this point put a contrary viewpoint to you to see how you evaluate it. According to a report in the Hindu published on the 27th of this month, which is just 3 days ago, the paper says, and I'm quoting the paper, special souvenirs published after independence and the First Republic Day by the Thiruvavaduthirai Adheenam had recorded an account of the mutt having handed over a Sengol to Lord Mountbatten and later to India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. In fact, the present Adheenam has also told the Hindu, and again I'm quoting him, Thampuram Swamigal gave the Sengol to Mountbatten, who returned it stating that it should be handed over to Nehru. Now, as a historian, is an account from a souvenir in your eyes proof? Or would you first like to see and evaluate the souvenir yourself? And I should add before you answer that as far as I know, the Hindu has not seen the souvenir, but it's relied on the Adheenam spokesperson's account of what that souvenir states.
Yes, you've almost given the answer there. You see, a souvenir is not the most authentic account that one would look for. If such a thing happened, if it went to Mountbatten at all, we'd have a record, official record of Mountbatten having received this person and having received this particular object and his having given it back. After all, Mountbatten is the Viceroy and Governor General at that moment, and every minute of his activities are recorded officially. Now, if there is no record, then what is it all about? And souvenirs can be compiled by anybody in any way. We do not have to trust them. That, as a historian, I can say the souvenir is the last source I would look at in all our records. We know what souvenirs are all about. They are to glorify something, to commemorate, not to record. There's a big difference between recording and commemorating. And in this case, the Hindu has not even seen the souvenir. It is merely taking somebody's word at face value. That we should never do.
You mentioned in your answer that Mountbatten was viceroy and every moment of his daily routine would have been officially recorded. I'm now referring to a report put out 24 hours ago by southfirst.com. It reminds all of us of something we should have known, that on the 14th of August, Mountbatten was in Karachi because the 14th of August was Pakistan's Independence Day. He, in fact, only touched down in Delhi at 7 p.m. 14th night. And I presume the ceremonies at the Constituent Assembly would have started by 11:30, 11:45 at the latest, which means between 7 p.m. and 11:30, he had just 4.5 hours. He had to get back from Parliament to his residence, Governor's General House. He had to change, he had to rest, he had to eat dinner. Clearly, in that short, limited 4.5 hours, he wouldn't have had time to meet the mutt, to receive the Sengol, and then pass it on to Nehru. So it sounds improbable, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Since he has only those few hours to do so many things, it would appear that this Sengol is such an important item that he has to set aside everything for that purpose. And if it is so important, then certainly it would have been recorded. It is nothing of the kind. It hasn't been recorded. And why would he do that at that moment? So that is what you say is absolutely valid.
Let me ask you one more question. As far as Mountbatten is concerned, he was Viceroy of India till the transfer of power happened. And he was really only concerned with the transfer of power as something that was a result of an act passed by the British Parliament. That's the authority for the transferring of power. Why would he, therefore, an Englishman, and a fairly close relative of the King of England, have sought an Indian cultural symbol for that transfer? That would have not only confused, it might even have undermined what was actually happening, because this was a transfer from British hands to Indian hands, not from one Indian hand to another. So why would he have wanted an Indian cultural symbol for this?
Oh, here let me say, Mountbatten at this moment is very keen on gaining Indian support or appearing popular in India. He was sent out with a brief to make the transfer of power as graceful as possible, as acceptable as possible, after the record of 130 years of colonial rule. So he charmed his way through India. He charmed Jawaharlal Nehru, you remember. None of the previous viceroys could, but he did. So he did go out of his way to cultivate Indian opinion and support wherever possible, without losing any of the strategic requirements of the British. So it is entirely possible that he would have accepted this kind of a ceremony if it had indeed taken place or was suggested. After all, even a racist and obnoxious person like Lutyens did use Indian architectural details in his buildings in Delhi. He used the Sanchi railings, for example, in Vijay Chowk, the dome of Rashtrapati Bhavan, and so on. That was perfectly normal. They did these things. So it would not be entirely implausible. But nobody has suggested the idea to him. He didn't think of it himself. And there doesn't seem to be any record of it. So it is possible that he could have if it was suggested.
If I understand you correctly, you're saying it's possible or plausible that Mountbatten could have thought of this, but the fact that it isn't recorded, and the fact that his schedule on that day simply didn't give time to receive the Sengol because he only returned from Karachi at 7 p.m., suggests that, in fact, the story is manufactured.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, on Saturday, that is 2 days ago, according to the Times of India, the Prime Minister said, and I'm quoting, "The importance of the Sengol does not lie in just that it has become the symbol of transfer of power, but also in its role as the bridge between the glorious country India was before it was subjugated by foreigners and its destiny." How do you respond to both parts of the Prime Minister's statement?
Well, a bridge always means linking two land masses with some gap in between. And here the landmass is the glorious past here represented by the Cholas, who came to an end in 1279. But the glorious part of the Cholas was in the 10th and 11th centuries, and India at independence. So what lies in between? Everyone knows. It is what is conventionally called Muslim rule and the Muslim conquest. But there's a twist in the tale there. He has included Mountbatten in that story, in a positive sense. So the British, as it were, are incorporated. And the gap is entirely Muslim, it seems. Or the latter part of the British rule in India, British presence in India, has been accepted. So it is clearly making the point about the bad Muslim.
Absolutely. So hidden and perhaps not so thinly disguised is an attack against the Sultanate and the Mughal period of rule in India. That is hidden in the Prime Minister's statement.
And strangely, not against the British, not against colonial rule, or not so emphatically. Because Mountbatten is part of the good part of the story.
He can't attack colonial rule under the British because he has to defend the story about Mountbatten and the fact that the Sengol was a sequel.
Exactly.
So in a sense, he's hoisted by his own petard when he makes this statement. He can only identify Muslims as foreigners and subjugating Indians, not the British. We've lost you there, sir. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, please carry on. Begin your answer again.
Oh, what happened to the slavish mentality about which he is always reminding us? If the British are acceptable to this extent.
Indeed. In other words, the Prime Minister's statement raises a lot of questions which he doesn't fully realize he's raised.
Or all his propagandists haven't understood it adequately.
Let's come to another aspect, Professor Palat, of the Sengol controversy. The Sengol is a scepter. It's a royal symbol. It pertains to a time when India was a collection of kingdoms and monarchies. How fitting is it that it should be incorporated into the new parliament of a democracy, one that boasts that it is the world's largest democracy, and one whose prime minister has now begun to claim that we are the mother of democracies. So how fitting is it that this royal symbol of monarchical rule should be incorporated with such pride in the parliament of a democracy?
Oh, there's a plain contradiction there between monarchy and democracy. The scepter is so obviously a symbol of monarchy, and power concentrated in one man, usually a man, the king. He holds it at the time of coronation and all important moments. In a democracy, the people are sovereign. So who represents sovereignty in India if you wish to have a scepter? There's only one person who represents it. That is the president. Nobody else. So number one, you can't have a symbol of sovereignty like this, a scepter, which is so totally royal in a democracy. But even if you wish to, and you have to have the people represented, constitutionally, the people are represented by the president and by nobody else.
In other words, it should have been President Murmu who received and installed the scepter, not the Prime Minister.
Very much so. And that would have applied even to Jawaharlal Nehru. He was the wrong man to whom to give the scepter, if it was conceived as a scepter. Because at that time, the sovereign in India was not Nehru, was not Mountbatten, but King George VI. India had just become a dominion. It was independent, but a dominion. And sovereignty still lay with the British Crown. So if power is to be transferred, King George, poor man, would have had to transfer it from the left hand to the right hand at best. And then on 26 January 1950, when India actually became sovereign as a republic, then if you wish to have the scepter presented to somebody, it would have to be to the first president, Rajendra Prasad. Again, not Nehru. He's only the leader of a party and the head of the government, but not of the state.
You're making a very interesting and important point, and in a sense, it's corroborated by something Mountbatten said to Larry Collins and Dominique Lapierre in their book, Mountbatten and the Partition of India. You're saying that in 47 and right up till 26 January 1950, the sovereign in India, because India was only a dominion status at that time, was King George VI. And the important point that Mountbatten makes to Larry Collins and Dominique Lapierre is they asked him about the toast that was drunk when they returned from the Constituent Assembly to what was then the Governor General's house and no longer Viceregal Lodge. And Mountbatten said that at 2 o'clock in the morning, Nehru toasted King George VI. And Mountbatten points out, he did not say the King of England, he said King George VI, because at that moment, King George was still King Emperor of India.
Yes, that's constitutionally completely correct. He was the king even then, and only on 26 January that situation changed. So there is that interregnum, that dominion phase, which we seem to forget when we were still under the British Crown. And so Nehru did the right thing. And if you recall, when Mountbatten died, Charan Singh was the Prime Minister, there was official mourning because a head of the Indian state had died.
Absolutely. But official mourning in Mountbatten's capacity as the first Governor General, not the last Viceroy.
Precisely.
What about the religious ceremonies that occurred around the installation of the scepter in the new parliament? I'm referring to the Havan, the presence of Brahmins from Tamil Nadu dressed in red and saffron, the Prime Minister prostrating himself. Was all of this in keeping with India's constitutional commitment to secularism?
Oh no, it's a complete violation of that. By all the conventions that we have followed since 1947, this violates it. It has been very clearly established that the state should be equidistant from all the religions, neutral between them, allow them to flourish according to the constitution, but not to be part of any one of them. So it must not seem to favor anyone over another one. That's the rule. And this is exactly what has been violated. So it certainly has departed from all the principles of secularism in this way.
Let me put to you the riposte or the defense that the government puts forward. It says that the Sengol represents India's ancient cultural traditions and it doesn't have any association with the Hindu faith. Do you accept that distinction?
Oh no, that's a spurious distinction between culture and religion. Culture comes in so many forms, religion comes in so many forms, traditions come in so many different ways. You can't pick up one of them and say that is the Indian version or Indian one particular. We know what we are talking about here. It is that there are multiple religions here and the state has to be equidistant between them. There are so many cultural forms that these religions and other traditions have taken. But you can choose between them. You do not have to take one which is so overtly religious. It is not culture.
My last question, Professor Palat. There are some people who fear that we are seeing a steady and increasing Hinduization or a Hinduification of our secular democracy. Do you as a citizen share that concern, or do you think it's exaggerated?
That is taking place officially, certainly. And I don't think the present government has made any bones about it. That this is a Hindu Rashtra and that is what they wish to see. So there's no surprises here, without any doubt. And that is why all this is taking place in this particular form. But if I may add one point here about the symbolism. Why have they chosen a scepter for such symbolism? They're creating clearly a new tradition. It's not an ancient royalty that is being crowned. It is not like King Charles in England, who's receiving a scepter. This is a new tradition that they're creating. And what does a scepter represent? It represents power. Kings always carry scepters and swords. A scepter is a stick. It's a substitute for a lance or a spear. They are warriors. So if you wish to show weapons, then a scepter is a very antiquated one to show in a modern 21st century situation. They should show something which is used in warfare today to show power, which is the idea. And that should be a gun. So they should have put an AK-47 there, perhaps. You look at the Taliban, they're very modern. They always carry AK-47s around, even if they do not have the ammunition to fire them. But they carry them around all the time. That's what they should have put here. Or if you're being really consistent about it, what is the ultimate weapon? It is a nuclear bomb. It is a bit impractical to bring it into the parliament, but you can have a replica. And that would have represented power. So if you wish to represent power, why this antiquated instrument?
If
Do
I
America, Russia, Soviet Union, China, any of their presidents carry around scepters? It is only the most toothless head of state that now has a scepter, namely King Charles in England. He has absolutely no power, and he is the only one who carries a scepter. All the others, when they want to represent power, show their full military might. Certainly not feudal symbols. So why are we going back into feudal symbolism?
If I understand your answer correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying two very important things. A, the holding of the scepter by a democratic prime minister is tantamount to his pretensions of being monarchical himself, which is antithetical to India's democracy. And secondly, you're saying, if the scepter is supposed to symbolize power, then in this modern age, an AK-47 would have been a better choice.
Very much so. If you're doing it, do it properly.
Professor Palat, on that note, which the government will find extremely controversial, I thank you for this interview. And in particular, I thank you for explaining to us how it is close to impossible to believe that this story that's been spun about Nehru, Mountbatten, and Rajagopalachari coming up with this idea could actually be true. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.